Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Eric Eichhoff, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Associate Director of Alumni Relations at John Carroll. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for our next installment of the John Carroll University Alumni Author Series. The Alumni Author Series was launched in November of 2020 as a way to highlight those who have written books, articles, poems, screenplays, and other written works within our John Carroll University alumni community. We have been blown away by the interest in the program from our community, and we're excited about its future. Tonight, we are joined by Christopher Kempf, Ph.D., class of 2007, and he will share his most recent publication, What Though the Field Be Lost, a collection of poems which uses the battlefield at Gettysburg as a way to engage ongoing issues involving race, regional identity, and the ethics of memory. Moderating the program tonight is George Bilger, Ph.D., Professor of English at John Carroll. George is a recipient of the Midland Authors Prize, the May Swenson Poetry Award, a Pushcart Prize, the NEA Grant, and the Cleveland Arts Prize. He has been given poetry readings at the Library of Congress, the 92nd Street Y in New York, and the Folgers Shakespeare Library in Washington, D.C. His work is familiar to NPR listeners because of his appearances on Garrison Keillor's A Prairie Home Companion and the Writer's Almanac. Tonight's featured author is Christopher Kempf, author of the poetry collections What Though the Field Be Lost, LSU 2021, and Late in the Empire of Men, which won the 2015 Levis Prize from Four Way Books and has been reviewed widely, including in the New York Times. His scholarly work, Writing Craft in the Workshop in American Culture, is forthcoming from Johns Hopkins University Press. Chris is also a recipient of a Pushcart Prize, National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship, and Wallace Stegner Fellowship from Stanford University. His poetry and creative nonfiction have appeared in Best American Poetry 2020, Boston Review, Georgia Review, Gettysburg Review, Kenyon Review, New England Review, The New Republic, and PEN America, among others. His scholarship appears in American Literary History, English Literary History, and Modern Modernity. In addition to his degree from John Carroll, Chris holds a PhD in English Literature from the University of Chicago and a Master of Fine Arts from Cornell University, and teaches in the MFA program at the University of Illinois. Please join me in welcoming Chris Kempf and George Bilger. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eric. George, you're muted. We practiced this.
Oh my God, Chris has been kidding me about this all night. If you're a professor teaching on Zoom, you never mute. You're always the one talking. So you're not used to this whole unmute thing. So I'm glad, George Unmuted. That could be the name of this poem. Thank you so much, audience, for joining us tonight. I can't tell you what an honor and a privilege it is for me to get to host a chat with Chris Kempf. A little bit of background. Some of you watching may be teachers, and you may have taught for a long time, as I have. And you enjoy your job and you teach some good classes and some good students, but every now and then a magical class comes along, and those teachers out there know what I'm talking about. And I had a magical class I've been at John Carroll for 30 years. I had a magical class in 2006, which I have never forgotten. It was a course in contemporary American poetry. And in this course were a bunch of extraordinary people. And one of them, Cleveland City Councilman Dan O'Malley, the English department just gave him its Distinguished Alum Award about an hour ago. Dan went on to become one of the really movers and shakers in the Cleveland scene. And another person in that class was a young guy named Chris Kempf, who was, at that time, one of the top 5,000 meter runners in the conference and won the final race, defeating and vanquishing all opponents. I was there and saw him win the race in, I believe, 15:01. Is that correct? Yeah.
That is correct. That is correct. Though I just said in the chat, I was never as fast as Cyril was, who is so kind to be here.
Well, anyway.
That's Father Cyril to you.
Father Cyril. So there was a young man in the class named Chris Kempf who took a contemporary poetry class from me, then took a writing workshop. And from the very beginning of that writing workshop, I thought, oh my God, this kid is good. And Chris went on from that workshop. Again, I've taught at John Carroll for 30 years. I haven't done the numbers for the number of poets I have taught, but Chris joins an elite group of the top two poets I have ever taught at John Carroll, the most talented two students who went on to distinguished careers. And so knowing I played a little role in that is kind of a thrill to me to see what Chris has gone on and done. And I've, like most of you in the group tonight, you have read, maybe you've read both of Chris's books, Late in the Empire of Men and What Though the Field Be Lost. But I'm going to say something that sounds a little bit over the top, but if you have read this book, Chris's kind of extended meditation on the Civil War and what it has meant to America, I would rank it among the most important books of poetry I've read in the last couple of years or more. And I would, a book I taught last year, Claudia Rankine's Pulitzer Prize winning book, Citizen. Chris's book belongs right there as an important reflection on what is this country? How did we get to where we are in this mysterious, bedazzled, weird, strange, beautiful, heartbreaking country? I can think of no book that invites deeper questioning about America and maybe some answers than this book. Really, Chris, this is an incredible book. And I don't know what's going to happen with this book, but it's going to be amazing. And the first question I want to ask you, this book in the realm of contemporary poetry, it's slightly unusual in that I would say most books of poetry are collections of poems, more or less on random subjects. But this book is deeply unified around a single subject. How'd you get the idea, and what was it like writing a book, unlike Late in the Empire of Men, a book that's about one subject essentially?
Yeah, thank you, George, for that incredibly generous introduction, which I will now fail to live up to. And for that smart question, which I'm excited to talk about. I also wanted to thank Eric for organizing this event, and thank you all for being here. I know we're excited to see where Justin Fields goes tonight, so we'll try to be done before that third pick. But yeah, I just wanted to say, I wouldn't have had what success I have if it wasn't for George. And for all of the teachers at John Carroll. I remember I took a workshop with George. I was class of 2007. I don't know what year the workshop was, but it was my first poetry workshop. And he held up this book by James Wright, an Ohio poet. And I hadn't heard of him at the time, working class poet, Ohio poet. And we read a poem called Autumn Begins in Martins Ferry, Ohio, and it's about high school football. And I remember just kind of realizing at that moment that poetry could be about real things in the world, that it could be about my life, everyday things. And that moment changed my life. And James Wright changed my life. And that's something I admire in George's work too, is this, the way he kind of, George, you lift the kind of everyday banality into the luminous and uncover, I think, the deep mysteries in everyday life. And it's something that I've picked up from you. And so, yeah, in regard to your question, this wasn't the book I was going to write. I moved to Gettysburg in 2017. I was teaching at Gettysburg College at the time. And I had a whole different idea for the second book that was going to be, like you described, George, a collection of poems, more or less random. But I remember that first night that Corey and I, my wife, arrived at Gettysburg. We had driven a Penske truck from California. We kind of parked it at Pickett's Charge, which you can do, and we looked out over that field, and it was just this kind of guttural, visceral experience of feeling the past there, and it just totally kind of shifted my thinking about the book, what I was trying to do with that second book, and it became like I had to write this book. And so I think one would call this a project book, is what poets are calling it these days. And I think they're becoming more and more popular. A lot of the books getting attention, like Ranking Citizen, a lot of the books longlisted for these prizes and stuff are tending more and more to revolve around single subjects, which before 5 years ago was never the case. I can't think of maybe this is my own idiocy, but I can't think of a book prior to like 2015 that is, I'm sure there are like single topic, but yeah.
Well, I'm thinking the first book I thought of that was kind of like yours from the way back time, like late 90s maybe, was Rita Dove's Thomas and Beulah,
Right.
And that focuses around a single kind of fractured narrative, but it just hasn't been a thing that poets have done. And my sense in reading your book was, once you got onto this great subject and you started discovering a language for it, the poems in your mind must have kind of started talking to each other. Did you find that happening? Because usually if you're a poet writing a standard collection of 40 poems about 40 different subjects, it's like you've got to start from scratch each time. But you were moving deeply into this subject, and the poems are resonating and bouncing around each other. In a way, I think that must have really helped the writing process.
Yeah, it helped. It helped in the sense that I was very much thinking of this in terms of a trajectory I wanted to lay out for the book to walk through, and certain information has to be relayed early in an early part of the manuscript. Certain ideas need to be set up early and brought back to, or echoed later. It helped, as you're saying, to kind of have a common set of even a common set of images. There's a lot of amputated soldiers in the book, which I'm kind of, every time they come back, they work in a different way as a different kind of metaphor. And so, because it's such a unified topic, it was a consistent set of images. I could go to a consistent set of even language patterns that you set up early and then you break them later or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so we got to hear a poem from you, but before you read a poem, I want to say, and I mean this really sincerely. One of my great questions as an American poet is, what is America? How did we get here? I love James Wright's poetry for that reason. A poet I'm sure we read in that contemporary poetry class who meant a lot to me is a guy named Tony Hoagland, who is continually, and this is a terribly overworked word, interrogating America and saying, like Allen Ginsberg, who are you? What are you? How did you get here? I read Chris's book, and that book to me is kind of what he tells me about the Civil War and the legacy and the heritage of the Civil War will be foundational for me now in encountering remarkable American phenomena, such as Chris writes about, like the Indianapolis 500 and Little America. America is a weird and it's a bizarre, crazy place, and a beautiful place and a terrible place, but it didn't just happen. It had a history, and Chris recounts it. So how about reading a poem from the book, Chris?
Yeah, I will. I'm going to start with one of your poems, though, George, if you will indulge me.
Oh, come on.
No, I really do. But I wanted to say, it's funny you bring up Hoagland. I think this book is very much in dialogue with what he's trying to do. And one of the things that I admired about his work was his ability to kind of inhabit contrarian positions or socially charged positions and give voice to, I don't know, and think through his own kind of implications in the violences of history, I guess, and bring those on the page. And this is something this book is trying to do. Specifically, I'm trying to kind of think about the Confederate monuments at Gettysburg, which it's a terrible cause, but those monuments are often quite moving for deliberate reasons as the South tries to kind of rewrite its history and romanticize its history. So I was trying to wrestle in the book with what does it mean to kind of feel the pathos of those monuments, even though, of course, I abhor that cause. So Hoagland is somebody I was very much thinking of. It's another poet you introduced us to. But yeah, and I have more to say about America, but this is a poem by George Bilguer first called Watering Flowers. And this is from George's new book, well, newish, most recent book, Blood Pages. And it's about George's son, Michael, who I met when he was just a baby out in California. George, I don't know what he was doing out there, but Jody, his wife, and his son were with them. And my wife and I drove down to Santa Cruz and we had dinner, and it just struck me as this beautiful moment of what John Carroll means and what the teaching and the kind of teaching that happens at John Carroll and that George practices. You know, this professor I had decades ago in Ohio, I'm holding his baby in Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
You know, it was a magical moment. So this poem is it about Michael, George, this poem?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Watering Flowers. It's only 2 sentences. It's longer, but it's only 2 sentences, which is remarkable about it. The little boy is holding a watering can in the twilight, an envoy of fireflies pulsing above the lawn, cicadas still going strong this late in the season. The can so heavy, he can barely lift it to the pots on the porch steps. He can't say his R's yet. They still come out like W's, although he does not know this. So when the old woman next door calls out and asks him what he's doing, watering flowers makes her smile, and the 2 young women passing on the sidewalk smile as well, something tightening back in their throats because he hasn't quite entered the language yet. He's still living in that world before everything makes a kind of hard, no-nonsense sense you can't do anything about, which means they want to draw him to their bosoms, and even the houses on the old street lean over him protectively. They've sent so many other children out of their cool wooden rooms and into the world. And his father standing beside him trembles with wonder and a sense that nothing so beautiful was ever promised him, ever guaranteed. But here it is, holy and hovering, a delicate breath in the evening, everyone smiling and about to vanish into night. Although of course the little boy doesn't understand. He's watching the soil darken with water and all the startled bugs moving around. So I think you hear in that poem how George kind of lifts the everyday into the sacred. It's one of my favorite poems, and not just because I know the little boy, so I'll read one of mine now. I'll just read, this is the first poem in the book, and this is one, George, I didn't tell you I was going to read this one, but I apropos of your question about your ideas thinking about America, one of the things I'm trying to think through in this book is the idea of a nation, this nation, as a kind of mystical body, the way the church is a mystical body, the way a God who is both human and divine. So a nation is not just a kind of political or social formation. There's something spiritual about it, and something that question of how it holds together. This was Whitman's question, and this is definitely the question that I'm trying to think through in this book. And so you hear that a little in this opening poem, which is called National Anthem. If then a country could be saved, may we all be its pulse and schematics. May our flags kneel for us. May nothing rain. May one day mean Tuesday, and may our planes on alert over Host and Riyadh whisper love songs to the canyons beneath them. May weddings go on for months. May guns gather bullets back into themselves like fishing line. If a country could be saved, could wave lagoons too be a part of it? Could slot machines? Could a country be lifted like a god? If Modesto comes back, could Saturday night we drive T-birds to the Wolfman? May dawn's early light lacquer our faces. May Huck and Jim, may group text. Let every coal seam spit back its dead. Let the many of us be one, the one be numerous and mongrel. Imagine Spangled, and may each of our stadiums smolder. May marching bands dazzle and thrall us, their drums like war, no one will remark. their winds and brasses forming the tightest of scripts. The seamstress we know, age 13, who dyed the cotton and cut the starlight in the flag Francis Scott hailed, was a servant girl, Grace Wisher. May we, in the poem of our country, be such exquisite stitchwork. May Synecdoche mean fruited plain, beautiful river. In that country, nuke silos swallow missiles down like hot dogs. In that country, cop cars flip Snapples to day laborers. May stars blaze. May landfills flower and hum. May one by one, we gather then in the swollen fields of our republic. Above us, the rocket's red glare growing faint. Some praise song swept upon us utterly, like a wind. May we will say, which will one day become us.
Oh my God. Chris, first of all, thanks for that reading of my poem. Oh my God, that was beautiful.
Thanks for writing it.
And I love this poem. And, you know, a discussion of a book like this tends to center around the subject matter, the Civil War, et cetera. But you can't lose sight of the fact ever that really it's a book of poems. It's not a history, it's not an essay, it's poetry. And Chris has developed this wonderful, sinuous, beautiful line that really I'm in envy of. I don't know quite how you do it, but it's magical. And just little phrases like, in that country, cop cars flip Snapples to day laborers. Just listen to that line. In that country, cop cars flip Snapples to day laborers. And when I read Chris's poems, it's like little flashbulbs going off. Chris knows exactly what I mean. And those of you in this audience who write poetry and read poetry know it too. Little bursts of light, little holes in one in the game of language happen again and again in Chris's poems. And it kind of pisses me off because he's so good. But wow, it's incredible.
Did you teach me that? Because the way you think about like the C sounds, cop cars, that's exactly how I think about it. So I'm thinking now maybe I got that from you.
Yeah, well, cop car and then the flip Snapples. And one of the pleasures of this book, of course, is here you've got this great, august, terrible event, the Civil War, approached with the utmost respect and majesty. But then again and again, Chris is bringing in, Snapples and, drinking beer and contemporary culture and banging all this stuff together. If you've read the book, you notice, and this is something I really loved about the book. Sometime the book, Chris, in a sense, I was going to ask you about this. He plays the tour guide. I am your tour guide. We're at the Gettysburg Battlefield Monument. I'm going to give you a tour. I'm going to take you on a tour. He's sort of a Virgil of this landscape. And I'm sure it's quite deliberate, but sometimes you're not quite sure if you're in 2019 or 20, or if you're in 1864, and then suddenly you realize, these membranes of time through which the poem passes. And I'm reminded of, and I'm going to get it wrong. Faulkner in his Nobel Prize speech said, the past is never over. In fact, the past isn't even the past. And in Chris's book, The Civil War, and I know this is true in the South from traveling down there, the Civil War is not past, it is present. It is ever present in the minds of so many Southerners, and you sense that in Chris's book. So I was going to say, with this kind of time travel that happens throughout the book, and incidentally, this will come up in a minute, behind all of this is Milton and Paradise Lost. The title of the book, What Though the Field Be Lost, is from Paradise Lost. I was going to ask about, if I had to make a list of my top 10 favorite poems, one of them would be the James Wright poem you mentioned. if autumn comes to Martin's Ferry. But another would be that crucial American poem for the Union Dead. And I feel like I hear resonances of that poem. And I hope those of you attending tonight have read that poem. But I feel in some ways your project is to amplify some of the themes that Lowell is suggesting in that poem. Was that in the back of your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is my hubristic statement that I dropped 10 minutes into the conversation. I think that poem, Union Dead poem, is the most important poem of the 20th century, because it changed how we think about writing the personal into the kind of public or political poem. In that poem, the way he's looking at the landscape on Boston Common, and he sees the past, and he sees the soldiers on that monument come to life, and that was absolutely what it was like to live in Gettysburg, particularly because it's a huge destination for Southern pilgrims. Pilgrims, like they make this pilgrimage, it's a kind of holy trip for people who drive Chevy Silverados and fly Confederate flags from the back of them.
Yep.
Is that offensive? Sorry if that's offensive to anybody. So you saw the past being present that way. You would see reenactors like Robert E. Lee, doing shots of Fireball at the bar. So part of the reason for the book, like feeling kind of like of the earth, with its drinking beer and playing football and all of that, is that kind of layeredness of history was so present at Gettysburg and so much on the surface of things there. And it was very strange to see like Confederate reenactors who believe in the cause. And I was trying to understand that without immediately indicting it. And that's kind of why the book takes its title from Milton, and Satan is the example of like the allure in which evil can be veiled,
Yeah, well, the first time I read through the book, I've read the book in its entirety several times. First time I read through, though, there was that kind of resonance. And when I came to the poem, Nativity Scene Dedication, and I came to these lines, when you say, "In the window of the AutoZone, chrome DeSotos turn in their tiered display." I thought of that moment in the Lowell poem, the Mosler safe. And I thought, yeah, Chris has got that poem working in the background. And that's what's one of the wonderful things about this book. The great, immense engine of John Milton in Paradise Lost is working in the background of this book. And that great poem by Lowell is working in the background of this book. And that immense historical event is working. And that all of those things, those gears are meshing and making this book happen. And that, I think, is why all of those things coming together makes it so multi-layered and astonishing. So, man, I mean, it's also an English major's delight, because you can say, in Pro Patria, here's I remember learning that Wilfred Owen poem in college, and Chris is using it, and it's just remarkable, Chris. Now, can I ask you one other quick question, then ask you to read a poem? One of the things I admire about the book is that although it would be easy for you to make fun of certain aspects of the South, it would be easy for you to, with a kind of cold, icy irony, to eviscerate it, but you don't. You're very kind to it, and you treat it very fairly. Was that a difficult kind of issue to struggle with in the book?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and thank you for the way you talk about kind of the elusiveness or the references in the book. It's really, I feel like you get it, which is nice as a poet to have somebody who x-rays the work so thoroughly. So thank you for that. I mean, as I was saying earlier, I was surprised when I moved to Gettysburg how much those Confederate monuments how effectively they worked in what they were trying to do, which is draw on a certain sense of nostalgia, a certain kind of rewriting of history, in order to kind of, reframe what the Civil War was about.
Yeah.
The Union monuments there are very boring. They were produced by government committee, but the South commissioned individual artists to make them. And, they're visually striking. The language on them is gorgeous. And so I wanted to kind of inhabit that ambivalence, and ask, like I said earlier, what it means to, abhor this cause, and abhor some of the people who continue to believe in it, but also feel the power of art, what is essentially art, those monuments. The poet Robert Duncan said, the poet's role is not to oppose evil, but to imagine it. And he said that in 1971, which is something Hoagland very much believed.
Yeah.
And so, and Duncan's point is that by imagining evil, you more powerfully resist it. You understand it from the inside. And I think that's what the book is trying to do. And it's trying to do that in order to kind of sidestep the kind of narrow demonization that I think exists on both sides of the cultural divide in this country.
Absolutely. Well, could you read another poem from the book?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Which one? Oh, any of them?
It's up to you.
Let's see. Yeah, let's do. Maybe I'll do now the next to last poem in the book, which will give you a sense of kind of the arc the book goes through. So you may recall the first poem I read ends in "we began," so claiming that we, that collective pronoun, as an identity. No, it doesn't. I misspoke. It ends, may we will say, which will one day become us. The next to last poem in the book ends after we began. So it's kind of, the book looks forward to claiming this we and then moves through that trajectory until it can claim it. So this is the next to last poem. It's called After, and it's another kind of repetition-based poem. After, the orchards flowered. The fields breathed out like a lung. What expectation? After, at the peace fence, veterans from North and South swapped belt plates for the country's press corps. Country, they whispered, slipping it across their tongues again as one might a finer Shiraz. Some regiments played banjo for their enemies. The president was alive still. Sherman hacked the rice coast into acreage, as in 40 with a mule. Imagine. After black sheriffs, after Easter as emptied shackles. After, at supper, the McDonoughs of central Pennsylvania looked up and watched their sheepdog, gone 2 months, a Meunier ball bedded in her foreleg, resplendent as fable on the porch steps. The moral, America, good puppy, good deathless little dream fiefdom. If for a minute, if in ceremony merely. In Manhattan after, in lapped surge, Southerners marched lockstep, correct as a stitched line behind the caskets of Union generals. In Virginia, Lincoln read Shakespeare. Paused, we know, at the moment, imagine the witches prancing, the woods risen with their broadswords, sedition lay chastened and gasping. And after, the cotton flourished. Freedmen practiced their signatures. After, fragments of munitions shimmered in their cases like saints' bones. So bullets for a time turned vintage. If in passing, if after the worst one country could visit on a people was visited, history dragged its scales to the Southland. Longstreet, Lee's hand at Gettysburg, conductor after of black militias in New Orleans, led them armed against a white league one would recognize, for which afterward no statues were erected. After from the ashes, after in America, no masters but ourselves, the spangled banners of school kids declared. In Carolina after, the exact fairgrounds the South had flaunted its stallions through, or had of a Sunday come to in its veils and worsted, freedmen, wreaths of lilies in their arms, interred the Union dead in excelsis. Sweetly the mulberries ripened, worms gathered, after we began.
After we began, and that crucial comma there, after we began. And that served as a kind of beginning perhaps of the America we see now. And Chris, I don't know how we're doing for time. Eric, do we have time for one more poem?
Love to hear one.
Yeah, how about one more? What if we went, Chris, from the Civil War there to the Indianapolis 500? Could you read that one? Because one of the pleasures of this book is juxtaposing those two worlds. And I love that poem.
It's a good point. It's very much a Bill Gare poem. I feel like this is something you would write. I feel like I was channeling you when I wrote it. But yeah, it's thinking about that book. It's thinking about that event, the Indy 500, as a kind of training for war. And it's a very militarized event with the flyovers.
Yeah.
And it's spectacular in a way. And it's another event that is like, you can see how it is insidious, but it's also like awesome, literally awesome,
Yeah. So you went to the Indianapolis 500?
I've been like every year, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We've got to go sometime. I would love.
My father would love that too. Yeah, usually I go with him and my brother. So next year. So this is just called Indianapolis 500, and it starts with a epigraph quote at the beginning from the president of Indy Motor Speedway in 1985. He said, "If anything in this world is bulletproof, this is it." Still, they inspect our coolers. Cameras wheel silent in their bubbles, the bomb dogs of the heartland tending the aisles. Bulletproof is such strict labor. Today, still, soldiers wipe the dust from their rifles in a street in the desert somewhere, so I, home here from Pennsylvania, can crack natural ices open one after another and watch the million multicolored balloons lift off from their terraced pagoda. The globes of blue and red wrapped tight, I imagine, in tiny flak jackets. From the back seats of 40 convertibles, Chevy, veterans smile and gesture for the crowd. Crisp flags rising from the grandstands. The pit crews, clean still in their fire suits, sliding their jet cars into position. The infield reels. This is your nation on myth. Remember moon landings, the pageantry we packed them off in their fiery candles with? Or think of Rome, late in its decadence. Its legions beat back in Gaul and Cyprus, though the empire, of course, was the stench and glory roiling on the stadium floor. This Memorial Day weekend in Washington, tourists queue past our first papers, saved there in bulletproof glass. But the hot dogs dripping on their coils in the Alley Cafe, Gate 6, are the word made flesh. The fire rippling in the engines suddenly, flag lifted, and we are one then, in our dying to watch a man, moonshot, or like some classic hero, hitch on the armor of his people. Plastic wings fanned outward, chassis gleaming, and turning to his distant, deathless gods, go airborne.
Oh, wow, fantastic. You can guess, I love that poem. And as in, we mentioned, gang, the Robert Lowell poem for the Union Dead, which enumerates and examines the great American struggles for freedom and racial equality. And the poem ends on this darkly ironic note about what we really want now is more parking for our cars. And in the midst of Chris's meditation on the Civil War is this celebration of cars and this curious human achievement. Chris, there's so many things about this book that I wish we could talk about more. I would like to do a whole interview with you about Civil War reenactors, which has got to be one of the strangest of American rituals.
I'm sure there's a podcast that they're running somewhere about that. They are strange people. No offense if anybody's one of them here, but
yeah, I mean, you saw these, right?
Oh yeah, it's one of the coolest things was that they believe it on both sides. Like they are that person. It's a very kind of method actor approach, and so like when you're when you live there, you see them all the time, but you start to notice like when they pose for photographs, they'll hide their beards and they'll hide their cell phones so that they look like period specific or like authentic. They'll talk to you in character until a certain moment when they have too many beers, then they'll start to talk to you like themselves. But
Yeah, just amazing. And I'm going to ask you one last question, and then we'll turn it over to a Q&A. When I have been to Little America, by the way, and I have been to many great, bizarre sort of American monuments and rituals. Having written this book, you must approach those places now with a much deeper and like more sympathetic understanding of them, right? Or not.
No, I think that's right. I think, I mean, you taught me this, Phil taught me this, like part of being a poet is seeing the world closely and being enchanted with the world and learning to accept, wonder and awe, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, right, Cyril? So I think I always kind of appreciated those places as this kind of, this pageantry and this spectacle of how this country, part of how a country kind of produces itself and stays together is through performing itself in these kind of, whether they're rituals, whether they're places that are kitschly Americana, there's to me a deep mystery in those places, and there's a real truth to them that I think I didn't want to ironize, like you were saying.
Exactly, and that phrase you used, America performing itself through Little America, through Civil War reenactors. It's just such a fascinating idea. And man, I thank you for this wonderful book, Chris. And with that, I open it up to the audience and any questions you might have for our guest author tonight.
George and Chris,
sorry.
Thank you so much for that wonderful conversation. It was truly spectacular to sit back and just watch the two of you talk about poetry and works that you appreciate, works that you've created. Really, really, really amazing to hear both of you kind of speak on something that you're so passionate about. So we have a couple of questions in the chat. I know I had one that, Chris, you and I talked about when we were talking about starting this program or this event tonight. And it really struck me in The Union Forever, your poem, The Union Forever, which I think is where you refer to that first time you roll up in Gettysburg and you're in the U-Haul. And the line that gets me is, I suppose that soldiers one day had fallen gut shot in our driveway. And it strikes me that America is such a young continent, or America as a country is such a young country, but it's such an old continent, and there's history everywhere. And I don't think we necessarily appreciate how much history is around us. And I know when we spoke, my background was in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we would see people in tricorn hats just kind of driving to the dry cleaner. Can you tell us a little bit more about that experience of living in Gettysburg? And because not everyone has that opportunity to live in a place that has so much history, and then how that has kind of, beyond just this book, impacted your trajectory as well.
Yeah, Gettysburg was a fascinating place to live, obviously, for reasons you can imagine. And I was a history minor at John Carroll, and so that I was kind of pre-programmed to think historically and to see I think of this book as like almost like an archaeology that is drilling down through the layers of the landscape and kind of trying to excavate that. And I think that certainly existed, that thought process was part of my life before Gettysburg, but it really kind of coalesced at Gettysburg, where, our house was a Civil War hospital. I mean, almost every building in Gettysburg was a Civil War hospital, just that kind of uncanny, I didn't experience it as eerie. I felt it as sacred, so feeling that, you're right, like we're a very young country. And I think for me, I'm trying to think, one of what has helped me to kind of see the history in the landscape has been moving around a lot and living in places like Gettysburg. I lived, like I said, in California for a while. getting outside of like where I was from, which felt to me kind of static and flat and historyless, which it's not, but a strange landscape had to be a kind of enchantment to it. And so it's very much like, I think of history as associated with place and kind of dwelling in a place as like a spirit of the place, you know? I don't know if that answers your question in a tremendous way or not, but.
I think it's just an amazing thing that, like I said, that is my favorite poem from your book. And it just really struck me as sometimes we don't necessarily see our surroundings for what they are and the historical nature of our surroundings. So
yeah, I think that's right.
So a couple questions come in. One person is interested in learning more about your writing process. Can you walk us through your writing process?
Yeah, I think for me, poetry starts as a way of seeing the world, as a way of noticing like an incongruity or something that seems to open onto a larger kind of mystery or something that is just I'm curious about. And it could be something as simple as like, you know, the reenactor at the bar, or watering flowers in George's poem. But there's something kind of sacred and spiritual in that kind of ritual or that moment. And so for me, writing starts as a kind of investigation to understand an event or a moment or something in the world. And so then it's a process of kind of thinking about that deeply and gathering a lot of notes. I'm a big researcher, for better or worse, so just kind of accumulating a lot of notes and then figuring out where the poem wants to begin. That's for me often the hardest part, is kind of sifting and sorting that material and finding, okay, how do you get the ball rolling downhill? Where's the top of the hill? So I'm a very slow writer. It takes me like 40 hours, 50 hours to write a poem, and which George, I think, is very different. I think George goes to the coffee shop and writes a poem every morning or something, which I'm envious of. Is that right, George?
Yeah, it shows. Yeah.
But then I think, like, in terms of process of the poem itself, the language leads me. I think I don't know where it's going to go, but I hear the sounds, and it's almost like the sounds and the rhythm of the poem open up a path ahead of me that I then have to find the words to fit that rhythm or fit that music that I hear.
Yeah.
So it's a sound-based thing, actually, and the lines that George pointed to are I think indication of that. It's a good question, though. Thanks.
Our next question comes from someone I think you know, Jake Karasik. He asks, in writing this book, how much, if any, did you draw on the American cultural chasm of 2017 through 2021? And if you didn't do so consciously, how much has the experience of writing the book helped you to relate to what is going under, to understand that chasm, especially as it relates to the events of this past January 6th?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Hi, thank you for being here. Congratulations on your upcoming nuptials. It's a good question. January 6th happened after the book was done and written, but I think the book is very much a response to the cultural divide in this country, and it is trying to kind of think both sides of that divide at once and understand and empathize, which are not kind of marketable commodities right now. It's trying to kind of understand, I think one of the things the book is trying to understand is how history and how power manifests themselves through language and through art. And I think apropos of like January 6th, that is what you saw there, I think, is a failure of a country to instill in its people a care for language and an understanding of how language worked, to the point that one can't distinguish between authentic and false news. We're a country that pushes STEM education endlessly, and yet nobody knows how to read the news. So I think the close attention to language on Confederate monuments, on Union monuments, and soldiers' letters in my own writing is a kind of ethics, you know, and a kind of way, it's a mode of political and social being that I think we're losing, and that worries me. Yeah.
Our next question is from a historian. I've considered this question, and I'd like to know what you make of it. As the South remade its history, there seems to have been a gradual shift in its chosen war heroes. Initially interested in the heroes, in great generals of the war, enshrining Lee, Jackson, so on, Longstreet. Yet at the turn of the century approached and the reconciliation of the country happened, the emphasis of monuments seemed to have shifted to the mythical common man, the victim of the lost cause, the dead common Confederate soldier. I've always found it deeply ironic that in some ways that represents an embrace in the Yankee common man mythos and the rejection of the old Southern aristocracy in the service of the continuing lost cause myth. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm pulling up a link that I can put in the chat. I think that's right. One of the Confederate monuments at Gettysburg kind of display this split consciousness. There are the monuments to Lee, to Longstreet. There's not. I don't know if there's Pickett or not. But there's not. Okay, yeah. There are a lot of monuments, like the one I put there. I don't know if there's a good image on that site or not, but these are just kind of average soldiers who are dying usually or are fighting in the statues. And I think that's right to kind of read that as a Northern trope. All of the Union monuments are, most of the Union monuments are kind of average stock soldiers. That's part of what makes them boring. But I'm just looking back over the question now. I think it's certainly part of, like, this part of this narrative that the Civil War was about, family and heritage and not this planter aristocracy, that's why you don't see, like, I mean, I don't know any plantation owners, but it's why they're not on the statues, it's certainly part of the kind of rhetorical maneuvering that's happening. And I'm just trying to kind of understand how that's working in order to kind of, I mean, it's a very tactical, and it works, there's a real power to that. There's a real pathos. And I don't want to dismiss that. But yeah, it's a good question. I always get scared when historians ask questions because it usually means my facts are wrong, which no doubt some are in the book. But thank you for that good question.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I having been to Gettysburg a number of times, like the North Carolina statue, the Louisiana statue are very evocative, very, very emotional. Unlike the Union ones, which are they just look like random Joe Union soldier, right?
Yeah, the guy who did Mount Rushmore did the North Carolina one at Gettysburg. Got some work and it's they're common soldiers, but they're in this action pose and they're not just standing there. Yeah.
Our next question comes from Father Cyril. My Jesuit training has helped me to see how, for both individuals and communities, grace leads to integration and wholeness, while sin ultimately leads to fragmentation and alienation. What role can the poetic wonder that you mentioned help America move towards integration and wholeness? In short, how can poetry be the grace for America?
It's a really good question. Really, really nice question. Nicely phrased. Thanks, Cyril. I think wonder is an important value in this book. It's an important value in all of my writing. And I think that's part of, like, my Jesuit, I mean, I'm not a priest, but my Jesuit training, such as it is, like, from Father Bilguer. I'm trying to think of a graceful answer to that. I think just one of the things that is implicit in wonder is a deprivileging of the self, and almost kind of, I think of wonder as kind of associated with the sublime, which is this experience of, like, I am so small in the face of this wondrous creation, and it's impossible to, like, I think self-doubt is an important value, and I wish it was more prominent. And I think self-questioning, and that comes with wonder, and that comes with kind of recognition of one's finitude, that one does not have all the answers, that one is not the kind of at the kind of crest of history. One is not living through an exceptionally special time. There is no time of human history that has not been a time of great suffering and war, yeah, I think, to me, wonder is just part of this kind of humility, I guess, to kind of, is that a gift of the Holy Spirit as well, or no? Is it? Oh, awesome. Yeah, so that's how I would answer that. Man, I haven't been to church in a year. I'm still doing pretty good.
Two more questions for you. One more about, again, going back to your writing in Civil War, and then one about your John Carroll experience. So, have you by chance read the book Confederates in the Attic?
I haven't, but I know of it. Yeah.
Okay. So maybe this is a bit of an interesting question, the way it's phrased. So the question relates to that book. Was it an important influence when you encountered the reenactors? And in that book, because it's actually one of my favorite Civil War books, it talks about how in some areas as you alluded, the Civil War is still raging, or still, they're still fighting the cause. With all that's going on in our world today, how do you see that all kind of like coming out? Like, obviously you saw people in, the grays and the blues. What was your mind when you saw that? Like, as someone who studied history, what were you feeling when you saw that kind of occur?
Yeah, I know of that book, and I'm gonna check it out. I should know it better, and I'm ashamed to say I didn't read it before in researching for this book. I think it's hard. It was part of the ambivalence of living at Gettysburg, because part of me kind of is disgusted by like the people in Confederate uniforms, frankly, and the kind of people who fly that flag and who storm the Capitol and all of that. Like a great part of me is disgusted by that, but part of me also understands the resentment that they're harboring, and how certain forces in American culture have weaponized or manipulated that resentment. So I guess I was trying to kind of understand, or maybe empathize is too strong a word, because I didn't want to empathize with them, but understand where they're coming from a little bit, and understand what it means when they truly believe that they are, marching in this parade to kind of honor their ancestors, and they do believe that, and they would say that to you or to me, and I believe that, but I also believe that that can get demonized the wrong way, and that can get reduced into kind of the echo chamber and then the social media discourse that we live in. So I just wanted to kind of, I guess, kind of, again, de-privilege my own values or judgments, and just kind of let everything sit beside itself, and take everything in as much as possible. And that's, of course, never possible entirely, but yeah.
Well, you did a masterful job. You truly did. So,
Thank you.
You definitely wove a wonderful narrative throughout the entire book on that. So the last question is, I always like to end with something about the author's experience at John Carroll. And clearly you and George have a wonderful relationship, and clearly, impactful kind of, on your education and your career trajectory. Tell us a little bit more about that experience of going to John Carroll, and how it has made an impact in your life. And, were there other professors or classes or writings or experiences that kind of made a significant difference for you?
No, it was just me, really.
I did take George for most of my classes, to be fair. That's the only reason I had a 4.0. I mean, so many teachers at John Carroll, including, Phil Metris. I don't think Phil's here tonight, which we'll make a note of and email him.
Yeah.
But even in history, Matt Berg, George, who's the woman who teaches Cleveland history?
Marion Morton.
Yeah, she was just a fabulous. And like at the time, I was a very conservative young student from Indiana, and Matt Berg and Marion Morton are hardcore Marxists.
Yeah.
It was the first time I had encountered like literary theory, or like ideas that I hadn't had, and it was seductive and alarming. And I didn't have LaGuardia. Yeah, I see that. I was supposed to take a Moby Dick class with him, but I think only me and Dan O'Malley signed up for that class, and so it got canceled. Which to this day I regret, because
That's too bad.
I know. But I think, the kind of teaching that I saw at Carroll is the kind of teaching that I believe in. It's the kind of teaching that I want to practice here at Illinois. And it's just close, committed mentorship. Your teachers, includes George especially, see you as people. They know you, you see them around, you know their kids. And like, I in kind of choosing where I wanted to work and what I wanted to do with my life, that vocation of a mentor and a teacher was, George taught me that, and Phil taught me that. And I think the kind of community that John Carroll has been able to foster has been very important, and I think is incredibly important for the liberal arts and the humanities in an industry, higher education, that can often feel impersonal and bureaucratic. that is an alternative, it's an alternative model of how we educate our young people. And I hope it stays relevant and able to happen,
Yeah.
Chris, I lied. I have actually one last question for you.
Okay.
And I think hopefully you're okay with this one.
Oh, yeah.
I know this was just a wonderful program, and I think it definitely whetted the appetite for people who maybe not know your writing or don't have your most recent book. How can people follow your writing, and where can people purchase your book?
Oh, that's very kind to ask. Yeah, I have no social media presence at all. So I do have a website though. It's just christopherkemp.com. I can put it in the chat. And that, let me see if I can do it. And that has links to my books. And I think this is my last reading in a while. So no upcoming events, but yeah, there'll be books down the road. It's very kind of you to ask. Thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you again, Chris and George. I think I speak for everyone and say what a truly wonderful evening. And it's very fitting that we highlighted Chris's work and had included George, because April is National Poetry Month. So I'm glad we were able to make that happen. It actually also happens to be that the month, in 1865, that the Civil War ended. So there's a really nice synergy with having Chris highlight what the field be lost as part of our author series. So thank you again. And thank you all for joining us tonight. It's been wonderful to have you here. We did record this. We're going to send this out to everyone once we get it up on YouTube as well. Before we conclude, I'd like to share a few other opportunities for you to take advantage of this spring with the Office of Alumni Relations and John Carroll University. On May 5th, we'll explore how electricity is at the core of all modern life. Author Craig R. Roach, Ph.D., class of 1972, will share his work, Simply Electrifying, which offers a comprehensive story of one of mankind's most important journeys, from a time when only a few could ever even imagine a world with electricity, to today, when for most of us, a world without electricity would be unimaginable. On May 12th, we'll focus on one of the hallmarks of childhood, youth sports. The Aspen Institute reports that over 70% of children aged 6 to 12 participate in at least one sport. However, the number drops significantly as students progress into middle and high school. Join Brian Garrity, Ph.D., class of 2001, director and associate professor of the Master of Arts in Sport Coaching Program at University of Denver, and Brian Biggie, class of 2004, an administrator in John Carroll's Exercise Science and Sports Studies program, as they discuss why youth sports remains vital to the biological, psychological, and sociological development of children. They'll also explore the future of youth sports with a focus on participation, privatization, and sport specialization. On May 17th, John McMurray, MSJD, chair of the Society for American Baseball Research Deadball Era Committee and Oral History Committee, and lecturer in the Tim Russert Department of Communication at John Carroll, will focus on Larry Doby and his baseball legacy. Doby integrated the American League just a few short months after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball. While his story is not as well known as Robinson, Doby undoubtedly faced many of the same hurdles, prejudices, and hardships. It should truly be a fascinating discussion. You can find more about and register for all of our upcoming programs, including the Alumni Author Series, Scholarly Lunches, Alumni Continuing Education Series, and our Alumni Spotlight events at jcu.edu/alumni. Additionally, we invite you to view recordings of our previous programs, including one about Confederate monuments, on the JCU Alumni Association YouTube channel. To view our extensive library, search for John Carroll University on YouTube. Finally, please consider a charitable gift to John Carroll in support of our students, faculty, and the entire campus community. If you've already made a gift this year, thank you for your generosity. If you have not, please join me in supporting John Carroll so that we can continue to deliver an outstanding education for our current and future Blue Streaks. You can make a donation by visiting jcu.edu/give. Thank you again for joining us. Take care, be well, stay safe, and onward on John Carroll.